Welcome to the Inner Sanctum, hosted by James Padmore. From the year 1484 until around 1750, approximately 200,000 alleged witches were put to death in Western Europe. The majority of these supposed witches were usually women and invariably poor. Many were condemned on the most basic of evidence. Simply looking like a witch was enough in those days. They underwent brutal torture in order for the authorities to extract a confession. Before the accused went to answer for their alleged crimes at the chaotic and vicious public trials, they were held in local prisons. These often comprised of a single room where prisoners were crammed together in squalid conditions with little or no daylight. These prisons were places of torture, misery, desperation and hopelessness for countless innocent victims in their final hours before being burned or hanged. In the south of England, the cage at St Osyth is one such prison. The building has been extended over the years and is now a house, however the old prison walls remain inside as a reminder of its grim past. The cage is currently owned by Vanessa Mitchell. Owing to some terrifying supernatural encounters which ultimately resulted in her leaving the property, Vanessa now allows it to be hired by paranormal investigators. One such investigator, Richard Estep, stayed at the cage for a week with his transatlantic paranormal team. Vanessa and Richard have written a book, Spirits of the Cage, True Accounts of Living in a Haunted Medieval Prison. It documents both Vanessa's fascinating experiences of living in this highly active property and Richard's investigation into the reported phenomena. And I'm honoured that they're both joining me today to talk about their experiences. Vanessa and Richard, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you and good morning.
May I say right now, I think your book's absolutely fantastic. It's one of those books that I found impossible to put down. I kept wanting to turn the page to find out what happened next, and for me, I think it's up there with other special British cases, such as Borley Rectory and, the Enfield Poltergeist. When is it that you bought the cage, and why did you buy it?
Well, I bought it in 2004, and I just fell in love with it. It was, I lived up Colchester as a child, and passed it every day, and it's just a unique little property, the little plaque on the outside saying about its history, and I saw it up for sale one day and just absolutely thought, right, I've got to have it. I've just got to have it. So I bought it in 2004.
Did you know anything about the history of the place and the local reputation that it had, or did you go in there cold, so to speak?
Well, no, I didn't really know too much about it. I knew about the history due to the plaque, the witchcraft connection to it, and that was pretty much it. I was aware that a gentleman who'd lived there 6-8 months before me had killed himself in there, but I didn't know him. But, I didn't know the rest of the history. I just knew two of the things, really. The plaque says about a witchcraft connection, but I'd never researched it at that point. I didn't really know anything about it, so I wasn't really aware of much, if I'm going to be honest.
Did they tend to keep that quite quiet? Do you think that perhaps there'd been some other residents before you bought it had experiences? I think in your book that you mentioned your friend, I think it's Linda, that knew some people that lived in the cage in the 1990s. Do you think perhaps that was kept secret from you so that you would buy the place and find out for yourself?
Well, I don't think the other residents had actually ever sort of came out and said too much. I was aware of a few things, really, just bits and pieces, but nothing that was terrifying, nothing that put me off. Having said that, I was pretty much aware of it, at the time of buying it and afterwards. But no, there were no big warning signals, people saying, oh, don't get that house, don't get that house. There was, don't forget, of course, I was living away at the time as well. So it's a case of I came back for the weekend, a couple of weeks later brought the house and moved back into that area. So it's not like I would have been stopped by the villagers and saying, oh, you're buying that haunted house. So no, looking back, I didn't really have any big worrying signs not to buy it, to be honest.
Okay, that's interesting because I think you've said either in the book or in other interviews maybe that you were sensitive to spirits as a child.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm guessing that perhaps you didn't get any strange feelings when you took a viewing of the property. Is that right?
Well, that's right. I mean, I only viewed it once, and I went upstairs on my own and I was downstairs. But no, I didn't get any real bad feelings about the place. If anything, I was just so determined to buy it. You know, I really wanted to buy it. I didn't honestly think, I look back now and I don't know why I didn't, but I honestly didn't think about the ramifications of living in a medieval prison and such an old property. I mean, as a child, I'd lived in a 700-year-old house, and that was haunted. And, you know, from a child, as you know, I've had experience, with the dead, seeing ghosts ever since a small child. Looking back, I just really wanted to buy it, and there was no reason why I shouldn't have done, including the fact it was a medieval prison. I just didn't think about it that much.
To look at the property, it's certainly very quirky. So, particularly its shape, and the front door is quite an impressive front door, isn't it, to have on a house? And not to mention the fact that you've got, I think it's Coffin Alley or something that runs behind the house.
Yeah.
So presumably, was that something that appealed to you, that quirkiness? Were you looking for something that had a bit of character?
Looking back, when I when I looked at the cage, I didn't look at any other properties for sale in the village at all. I didn't look at any others. I was just homed in. I thought, I've got to have that house. I had a good deposit from the sale of my other house, and to be honest, I could have afforded a lot of other things and looked at many more houses, and I didn't. I just, for some reason, my brain just homed into that house. God knows why, because I wouldn't be like it now. I'd look at lots of different places, but at the time I was obsessive. I just completely single-track mind. I don't know why I was. It's just what happened.
Sounds like it was, like you said, it's almost destiny for you to buy the property.
Yeah.
And Richard, I guess it's perhaps destiny for you to investigate the cage. You're an experienced paranormal investigator. Have you seen places as quirky as the cage, or does this really stand out as one of the most significant properties that you've been to?
Well, the cage seems to be very unique because it has that witchcraft connection. Excuse me, and it's also a very intense case where you have it focused upon one individual. When Vanessa was there, the phenomena was at its height, and I don't think that's any coincidence. So every case has its quirks to a certain degree, but the cage has a lot of history, has a lot of character, and it's just a fascinating case. So it definitely ranks up there.
So I understand that you're originally from Britain, but you now live and work in the USA. Is that right?
Yeah, Leicester. I'm a Leicester lad, born and bred, and you can take the boy out of Leicester, but you can't take the Leicester out of the boy. You know. But I moved to the States in 1999. I've been investigating for a few years in the UK and continued doing that over here. Was
the cage a location that you were aware of when you were living here, or was it something that you were made aware of when you were over in the US?
No, I hadn't heard of it until I saw it on TV, and I think it didn't have national prominence until something like 2010. Am I right, Vanessa?
Yeah, a few years ago, 3-4 years ago.
Certainly featured on Great British Ghosts over here in the UK, I think.
Yeah, that's where I first saw it.
That must have been 2010 then, yeah.
Yeah, so, Michaela Strachan can't be wrong. So I saw it, and I saw Vanessa's story, and she talked about some of the witnesses. You know how a friend of hers had been a sergeant major in the army. And the caliber of witnesses that have experiences like that intrigued me. So I reached out to Vanessa over the internet and said, hey, I'd love to come and investigate. And as you mentioned, Vanessa does rent the cage out to people who want to investigate it. She didn't take a penny from me. She didn't say, sure, you can come in and that'll be however much money. She just said, yeah, come on in, move in. Here's the keys to my house, even though I've never met you. And you find what you find.
Well, that's real testimony, I guess, to your reputation as a serious paranormal investigator. I'm not decrying commercial events. There's a place for them in the paranormal field, but I think that getting somebody in and a team like yours was probably a shrewd move on your part, Vanessa, to try and really get to the nitty gritty of what was going on at that property.
Yeah.
So just to touch on, you moved into the property. I gather that you moved in with one of your friends. Is it Nicole that moved in with you?
Yeah.
So some rather unnerving things happened to both of you while you were both living there. So what sort of things initially started? I know that you had things like shadow people, etc., but did it start gently and then build up, or was it, bad from day one?
No, I think it was active all the time, I think. Me and Nicole had only been in there a few weeks when the first really big thing happened. I'd got home from work, I went into the kitchen, and on the kitchen side, I found this A4 bit of paper, and I've gone and looked at it, and it was the gentleman who'd hung himself in their death certificate. I thought, where did Nicole find this? Anyway, so I'm reading it. But what struck me straight away was this paper didn't have a crease on it. It was absolutely like it'd come out of a printing press. So Nicole came in a bit later and I'd said to her, oh, where'd you find this? Well, she hadn't seen it either. After discussion, we thought someone's come into the house, trying to scare us, thinking logically, looked around the entire house, couldn't find any windows open. Just couldn't work it out. I was just trying to work how everything got in the house. I just didn't understand why it would have turned up. I didn't have a reason for it, and I thought it can't be that it's magicked itself. I didn't, or apported itself, as I now understand. So that was the first big thing. So the death certificate of the gentleman who'd hung himself in there, literally 6-7 months before, just turned up all of a sudden. Just weird. And that was the first thing I thought, what is going on in this hat? What is it?
Did that later present itself again as anything significant? Any links to that death certificate? I know that you say that it was the gentleman that had hanged himself in the property, but do you think that maybe that was a message to you as to the identity of the person that was there?
I think it was connected. There wasn't just, if he was there, it wasn't just him. It was many others, as we've had lots of proof and evidence since. I think it was a message. I think it was, if anything, saying I'm still here. I actually spoke to his wife. His wife actually contacted me quite a while afterwards, and she said, listen, I understand that my husband's death is a part of the history of the house now, but why are you saying you've got a death certificate? I said, well, anyway, she came round to the house. I invited her around, and she was a lovely lady, actually. We had a really long chat for like 3 or 4 hours. And she said, when he died, she was sent the only copy of the death certificate. He had no other living family, no family in the area. So she said, how could I have one? And I said, well, let me tell you. And because she's also a local woman, so I said, you can ask that one, and all these people that she'd known as well. And I said, please, just don't take my word for it. Ask all these other people, because they all saw it as well. But it's a mystery, because she said the death certificate was never sent to the cage. It was sent afterwards, because she moved out straight away. It was sent on to another property, and she couldn't understand it either, no more than I could. It's still a mystery. All I know is that it happened.
That's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah,
that really is strange.
Yeah.
So obviously we've had the certificate appear, but I know that you've experienced other things such as shadow people, and you've seen things moving and heard voices and steps on the stairs, etc. In the book, you also mention a local woman, I think, by the name of Ursula Kemp, and that's obviously another name that's fundamentally linked to the cage. And where did that name actually come from?
There's a plaque on the outside of the cage. By the council many years ago, saying that obviously Ursula Kemp was in prison there before she was hung as a witch. It's just local history, really. It's just, as we know, as the villagers know, that what happened back in the witch trials in St Osyth generations ago.
Have you researched any further, or do you know of any other local historians that have researched any further into her history?
Yeah, many people have over the years. In fact, I got an email literally 2 days ago by a lady that's writing, a historian that's writing on witchcraft, and again is including Ursula Kemp. I mean, I'm not a historian myself, so I can't tell you the times, dates, history of all of it, because that I leave that to the experts. Apart from that, I've got a memory like a sieve, and I wouldn't remember it correctly. But she's a part of, as well as Osyth is, a part of St Osyth history. I
think you even mentioned that, I think it was you that actually saw a woman who you believe to be Ursula Kemp in the prison room. Is that correct?
Well, I saw a woman in old-fashioned clothes. Could it have been her? Possibly it could have been her. I don't know. But I know she was old-fashioned, and she was of that generation. She never said her name. I never asked. It wasn't that kind of encounter. So who knows? Who knows? It was certainly a woman from those days, though.
And she appeared to be friendly.
Yeah, she felt
She felt really nice, actually. It's weird. When you see something like that, it comes with a natural, sixth sense of instinct. Is it going to do me harm, or and she felt very nice. This lady felt very loving, and I felt very comfortable with her, and I was absolutely fascinated. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I didn't run out the room screaming. I didn't see her and then absolutely panic. I just stayed where I was and watched what she was doing.
Yeah, especially given some of the other encounters that you've mentioned in the book, then you do get an impression that there is that stark contrast between this particular entity and some of the others that you've experienced.
Oh, gotcha, yes.
Some of the things that I noted, there's quite a few recurring themes, I think, at the cage. This old lady that's seen staring out of the upstairs master bedroom.
Yeah.
Rattling door latches seems to be a common thing, as well as objects being moved and heavy footsteps.
I have people to this day stopping me and saying, "Oh, you the lady that owns a cage? I've seen a lady outside the window." It happens all the time. I've been contacted lately by literally tourists, because St Osyth is a tourist area with caravan parks. I've been contacted by and these people don't want anything from me. They're just saying, "I have to tell you what happened. I walked past your house. I saw a lady." It happens so many times. I was approached at my son's school by people coming to me saying, "Listen, I've got to tell you what I saw at the house." It seems that whatever's in the house, especially this lady who stands by the window, lots of people are seeing her. Now, I've never seen her. I've never walked past the outside of the house and seen her, so I can't really talk from personal experience, but there's so many counts of local people that have seen her. Even people who are non-believers and that said, "My God, I never would have believed it, but I was watching her till she disappeared." And are scared and are genuinely scared when they're telling me these things.
It's fascinating, really, that you have this old lady who I gather has very lank hair, and she almost looks like she's corpse-like in terms of the description that people give.
Yeah.
And Richard, something that I've noticed from the book is that the property's been built on, and that the upstairs and some of the extensions aren't part of the original cage building. So who could this old lady be? Would she be more modern, or are we suggesting that even ghosts from several centuries gone by can somehow interact with the current environment and go upstairs that perhaps didn't exist when they were alive?
That's a great question. And it is something that's easy to overlook, this assumption that every entity that haunts the cage is going to be due to its history of witchcraft. I don't know a great deal about every single individual that's lived there since they built upon it. It wasn't something I was able to find out much about, but your implication that spirits from a more recent, from an older time may be able to interact with the environment as it is today, I think is a very good one. We've seen multiple cases in which that does appear to be the case. The only condition being they can't be residual haunts. They have to be somewhat intelligent in order to navigate the new environment, the new architecture.
The flip side of that, I guess, what you're alluding to is perhaps the cases where ghosts are witnessed as being only partial. You see them from maybe the knee up, and it's to do with the level of the ground that would have been there or not there, depending on the age of the ghost, and that those ghosts tend not to interact with the witnesses. They tend to be unaware and blissfully ignorant of what's going on around them.
Absolutely, James. Those seem to be the ones which appear to be like natural recordings, and they're no more interactive than the images on my TV screen. Whereas the ones that seem to have some degree of interactivity, they're the ones that appear in multiple places, which may or may not have been there when they were alive. So I find the latter type much more interesting.
Sure. So the former are the more like the stone tape theory related entities.
Yes, precisely.
An imprint as opposed to some form of intelligence.
Exactly that. Yeah, I think we're not dealing with a recording when there's interactivity. We couldn't be by definition. But when you have those that don't appear to be aware of their environs, they don't seem to be aware of observers, then I start to go down that more residual route. So
having said that, I mean, another type of entity that seems to be interacting with the modern part of the building, Vanessa, is this jailer, this man who looks quite angry and mean-looking and dirty with a ponytail. How often did you encounter him? And he certainly sounds like he was quite a malevolent individual.
I can't. I would many times by feeling and by activity. He didn't show himself to me like the lady did and like the young man did. It wasn't a regular thing, but you're sitting in a room and something would fly across the room. You are anywhere in the house, and the door latches would go at night. There'd be thuds up and down the stairs. But he came with just a horrible, terrifying, really scary. He certainly wasn't friendly in any way. The most interesting one I saw in there was a young man, and I was just sitting on the sofa during the day, broad daylight in the summer. So I was sitting in the living room, the back door was open, and I've just seen this man. He was late teens, early 20s, and it was in real time. He was staring at me, and he was looking at me, and I was looking at him. And it was absolutely in real time. I knew he was intelligent. I knew it was a real time connection. I could see him so clearly. I could see the lines he had on his face. I could see all of him completely, except for the waist up. He only appeared himself to me from the waist up. Whether that was, like you said earlier, the position of the flooring then, or he hadn't manifested fully. But he was gliding along, looking at me. And I just sat there and I was staring at him, and he was, so he was very, and again, he didn't scare the life out of me, not like some of the others.
And you got a name as an imprint, is that right? You call him Jack, or was that
just
an affectionate nickname?
It was just what I felt his name was at the time. I don't know if I'm right, but it just was Jack in my head, and I've always called him Jack because I'm sure that's possibly what his name would have been.
And do you think that he was just in visitation, or do you think that perhaps there was some form of link between him and the cage?
Yeah, I don't think he was just one passing through. I think there was definitely a link to him in the cage. I think he was there at some point. Again, he was from hundreds of years ago. He wasn't a modern day one.
I think in your book you say that he came across as being you say he had brown eyes, or he was quite a kind looking gentleman.
Yeah, he had long black hair. He had a nice face. Yeah, he did, but like I said, it comes with a feeling. Again, for the second time in the house, seeing something, I wasn't scared. A lot of the time, I was absolutely terrified and petrified, but he didn't make me feel like that.
Certainly not like the shadow figures.
Yeah, I had many encounters. I'd be sitting in the front room, and you just see this black mass, and it would literally go up to the ceiling, go down the walls, and to the floor. It would move about. There was so much dark, negative stuff there as well. Just seeing ghosts in there what was a very small part of the story, to be honest. The activity, things flying across the room and door slamming, I couldn't see what made that happen. The black masses, the shadow figures, I couldn't see. You see, to me, if I can see it, I've got half a chance of fighting, or and when it happens when you can't see them, that's a lot more scary. I mean, I'd be in bed at night, and the latches of my door would smash up and down, and I'd be sitting there absolutely so scared. It's like a searing white fear. The fear is unbelievable. That is a lot more scary than seeing something. And being in bed and hearing something coming up the stairs, and you can't get out because you're not going to jump out the top window. You've got a baby by your side, and you're not going to go and confront it and go through the door. That's more scary than anything. I think if you can visually see something, you have half a chance of your brain understanding and thinking, what do I do? What do I do? But when you can't see anything, and the house is just, I'd sit downstairs in the front room, again, broad daylight, and there's a door. You have to open this little door to get into the staircase, and it would just open and slam. And you do sit there thinking, oh my God, this is, and of course you rule out, is there a window open? Is it a trick of the light? You do all of those things, because the last thing in your brain you want it to be is something paranormal. It's the last thing. It was my house. I wanted it to be a trick of the light. I wanted it to be that a window's open. I wanted it to be noise from the neighbours. I didn't want to have to leave my home. I didn't want to have to leave it, and I did. And that doesn't make any sense. Nobody would leave a home unless they really, really had to.
Absolutely. I mean, the physical assaults, the accounts of the physical assaults that you've given, they are deeply disturbing, and they do cross a line, don't they? I know that I think you said that you were hit in the upstairs bathroom.
I was hit, brushing my teeth, getting ready for work in the morning. You know, it wasn't 1 o'clock in the morning and I was sleepwalking and thought something happened. I'd got out of bed, I'd had breakfast, I was brushing my teeth, getting ready to go to work at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And I got hit so hard. I screamed, my toothpaste went up in the air on my bum, you know, and it's, you know, I didn't tell anyone that for ages. How can you say that you got hit on the bum by a goat? You know, you don't say it. I never said it for years. It's so embarrassing. But it happens. And when that happens, you can't protect yourself against something you can't see, you don't understand. And when it's physical to you, what was I supposed to do to it back? You can't do anything. What on earth can you do? The police can't do anything. People said to me, why didn't you call the police? I'm like, they would have thought I was deranged. Excuse me, I've just been attacked by something I can't see. You know, really?
Yeah, exactly. I know that your friend, I think Mikey, was pushed off a ladder near to the stairs. As well, I think that's in the book as well. And I think a few times people have said to you, I know that you've just said this, is that you can't fight what you can't see, and that must be very frustrating and also terrifying when it happens to you.
It is. It's a fear that I don't think many people would understand. You know, you watch all these horror movies and they say, look behind you, you know, in the cage, it was look behind you, there was always something there. And you could hear and you could smell and you could sense and you could physically see doors slamming. And, you know, it's so terrifying, but at the same time, you don't really have any protection because if you start telling people that, I mean, especially the job I was in, it was a very male-dominated world. I had to work really hard at it. You know, I really had to be on top of my game to keep my job. I was in sales and I couldn't have gone to work and said, oh my God, I'm living in a haunted house. I'd have been laughed out of, you know, it's hard to know what to do when that was happening. I certainly found it hard to know what to do. I think if it happened to me now, I'd know what to do. At that time, I didn't have a clue. For years, honestly, I think I just shut my mouth and just tried to try and deal with it on my own, which obviously didn't work.
And given your career, it's obvious, you know, it's clear that you're a strong-willed person because you have to be in a high-pressure sales environment. But how did all of these experiences that you were having at the cage affect your personal life and your health and your state of mind? It must have taken its toll on you.
I completely changed. I look back now, and I knew I was changing. I was very depressed. I was sad. I was lonely. I'd have friends that had come to my house and that refused ever to come back in because they'd seen or heard something. And especially when I was pregnant, you can't really leave. You know, what can you do? You can't just go and sit in the pub next door. I became really isolated. The house completely isolated me. I felt that I couldn't tell everyone what was going on because they'd think I was mad. I mean, because this wasn't just seeing a ghost. This was a hostile, active haunting that didn't go away. It just got worse and worse and worse. For 3 years, it just didn't stop. And it escalated and it got worse and worse. And I couldn't see a way out at the time. I just had to just stick with it. I couldn't see. I look back now myself and think, Vanessa, why didn't you get out sooner? I couldn't get out at the time. I didn't have a penny. I was in lots of debt. I didn't have any money to leave. But looking back, I'm sure. But whatever had me kind of had grip on me. That's how I look back at it, because I'm actually a very strong female, and I don't know why I didn't help myself sooner, but I didn't because I couldn't.
Do you think that in some way the entities there were trying to scare you away, or in some way trying to keep you there? Do you feel any sense that you were being controlled, or at least there's some attempts to control you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a bit to keep me, a bit to drive me away. I'm not sure. I don't know, but I knew what it was. It was deliberate. I knew what they were doing. There was a reason for it. This wasn't just a random seeing a ghost. This wasn't just putting things down and thinking, oh, I swear I put it there. You know, and it turns up somewhere different. This was constant. This was bad.
Looking at it from an outsider's perspective, and having interviewed Vanessa several times and heard her stories remain consistent throughout, it seems to me that whatever did haunt the cage, whatever does haunt the cage, had a vested interest in her being scared and had a vested interest in her sticking around in that state. And so I strongly suspect that the state of emotional exhaustion and the constant fear acted as a kind of power supply for whatever that entity was. And the last thing you want to do, of course, is get rid of your power supply, right? So I think there was just enough fear to keep her trapped inside there, but not enough that she fled in terror, at least until the very end of her tenure. And one of the problems with writing a book like this, or any book in this field, is that most readers are used to everything being tied up in a nice, neat little bow by the last chapter, and that's not the way real life works. And The Cage is an ongoing story. It's still unfolding. Vanessa is still connected to it, even though she doesn't live there. There are still people coming in, bringing their own energies and making their own discoveries at that location. And I'm just one of many, many people that's put some time in trying to figure out what's going on at the Cage. So I'm far from special or unique. And I think that the remainder of this story is still to be written.
Absolutely. I think that ties in nicely what I was going to ask you next, really, in terms of the investigation. I believe that you investigated the Cage back in 2016.
Yes, the end of January, beginning of February, and it was freezing.
Yeah, it is really cold at that time of year, isn't it? So there were four of you, I gather, that were investigating for that week, and you were joined by Stephen Widener, who's an investigator from Colorado.
Yeah, Stephen's a good friend of mine who also happens to be a priest, and despite the fact that I'm an agnostic, it's nice to have some spiritual heavy artillery on call. And he's also the kind of friend that will jump on a plane with you to go investigate somewhere like the Cage at the drop of a hat. So there was Stephen. We came from America, and two of my friends from the UK, two female investigators. I felt very strongly that because of the connection with the witch trials and the fact that the majority of the people that were accused of witchcraft were females, I needed a number of females on my team. So our team was 2 men, 2 women, and we moved into the Cage on a weekend. Stephen and I arrived first, and Vanessa very kindly gave us a quick tour. She doesn't like to be in the building after dark, so she took us to the Cage, took us around. We captured a pretty interesting EVP on that brief tour, in fact, upstairs, which we found that night and impressed us both. And we moved in for 5 days and nights.
And the EVP that you mentioned was the voice of an elderly lady. Was it talking about the bathroom or something? Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if your listeners would like to hear it, it's posted up at my webpage on richardestep.net. You can hear that voice. We were walking around, and obviously you can all hear Vanessa now. She doesn't sound to me like she's 80 years old, even though she's getting up in the middle of the night with a kid to feed him.
I just feel like I'm 80 instead.
It's the mileage, and it's not the years. But so we're getting a tour. We go upstairs, and one of us asked, "Is there a light up here?" And you hear an old lady's voice say very distinctly, "Yes, in the bathroom." And then you hear Vanessa say, "Yes, just over there." So firstly, she didn't answer the same question twice. And secondly, Stephen and I both had a digital voice recorder running at the same time. I was holding a handheld unit, and Stephen had one of those EVP bracelets. I don't know if you've seen them,
yes,
James.
Yes, I have, yeah.
But they're actually pretty handy to have. Just never forget that you're wearing it when you go to the toilet.
I think you even mentioned that in the book, don't you? You gave him advice to turn it off.
It makes the evidence review phase a bit more awkward when you've forgotten. Anyway, we picked that up on 2 recorders. Now, there was no other female in the Cage but Vanessa. This voice spoke immediately on top of her. It spoke, and then she came in afterwards. They sound distinctly different, and it was answering my direct question.
So again, that backs up what we've been talking about before, which is the presence of an intelligence there as opposed to something that's just residual.
To my mind, it definitely does. That's my opinion.
So in terms of your investigators that came with you, was everyone familiar with the case of the Cage?
We'd all consulted with Dr. Google, because, of course, that's what you do. But other than that, a lot of what we got was listening to Vanessa's testimony and getting it straight from the horse's mouth. No offense with that term there. She's the expert on the case because she lived it. I only spent a week poking around the house day in and day out, but she lived it for years.
And you mentioned using digital voice recorders. Obviously, you picked up that EVP with those handy recorders, but you've also used things like electromagnetic field meters. But in the book, I think you talk about some other approaches that you use, which I would define as being kind of more in the spiritualist category. So things like the human pendulum, and you tried some scrying and also some Ouija boards. So I think for the benefit of the listeners who aren't familiar with that, could you just give an overview briefly of what the human pendulum experiment is and how you actually used it at the cage, please?
Sure, and it's a relatively controversial technique, as are all of the three that you named. The human pendulum is a method for opening up, or at least this is how it's supposed to work, for opening up somebody as a channel for spirit communication. So one invites the spirits to use somebody's body as a pendulum and to move it backwards and forwards, left or right, in answer to yes/no questions. Now, on the one hand, the skeptical approach to that is to say everybody has what's called the ideomotor response, where their subconscious will move them in order to try and please the crowd. We all want to please the crowd. We all want to fit in. So I've seen the human pendulum not work at all, which it just flatly refuses to work on some people. On other people, it works very, very well. And you'll ask questions such as, were you a prisoner in the cage? You might lean forward to the yes position or lean backwards to a no position. And to try and rule out that suggestiveness, that ideomotor effect, we were conducting it with earphones in and music playing so that the person acting as the pendulum couldn't hear the questions.
I guess it's also useful having investigators who aren't fully familiar with the case. So you can argue that if they had no prior knowledge of some of the more finer details, that anything that came through would potentially be more compelling.
Absolutely, and I think one of the interesting things is that you would expect, if this were down to the subconscious of the investigators, including myself, we would fire the Ouija board up, as it were, and we'd be instantly talking to these poor souls accused of witchcraft, or to the spirit of the jailer that Vanessa has mentioned. And instead, what we get is an entity who goes by the name, or claims to go by the name, of Redfast, and claimed that he had been a shepherd on the priory land, which is across the road from the cage, for many years, and was just basically passing by. He implied that the cage was like a spiritual beacon or terminus for transportation. And I thought Redfast was an odd name, quite honestly, but when I did some research afterward, I found that was a fairly common term during the Middle Ages for somebody who was very red-faced.
That's really interesting, especially if you're not familiar with that term and yet it came from another source as yet unknown.
And that is still a suggestion, James. And again, with any method at all of investigation like this, whether it's a piece of electronic equipment or whether it's something like scrying or the human pendulum, always take it with a massive grain of salt. Never assume that you're being told the truth. Never assume that this can only be a paranormal explanation. And of course, your mileage may vary.
Exactly. It's interesting. There's been plenty of people doing investigations and conducting experiments at your property, Vanessa, but did you ever decide to do your own investigation or conduct any experiments when you lived there, whether that was with Nicole or just when you were there on your own?
God, no, not at all. I knew I was in trouble. I got the vicar in once, but I knew I was in trouble in the house, and what I didn't want is to get some people in and to say, right, okay, Vanessa, you're living with 2 blokes, 3 kids, 4 women, see ya, and walk out the door and leave me with it. I knew I was in trouble. I knew the house was haunted, and I was terrified. And no, I didn't do an experiment, so I didn't want to encourage it. I mean, what I know now is very different from what I knew then. I've learned now how to understand and analyse, and the ghosts I see and what's happened to me from a child. But at the time, I hadn't. I was just. The truth is, I was just terrified and scared. I didn't know the best way to deal with it. I got the vicar in once. That didn't work. There was actually activity while the vicar was there. I showed him throughout the entire house. He went in the bath because the taps are always running in the bathroom. We went downstairs. He got his holy water, got his robes, set up his little altar, went back upstairs for the holy water, and the taps are running full blast. So apart from him, I didn't, because I didn't want to risk making anything worse.
Yeah, potentially. I suppose if you're bringing in somebody from the priesthood as well, you don't really know what it is that's in your property and how they're going to react to that. And then potentially they may be, if they are malevolent entities anyway, they may, I guess, be more vindictive towards you, and perhaps you would suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
Did you have to tread very carefully when you lived there?
Yeah, I was always aware. I just had to be careful all the time. I mean, for the last few months, I was living completely in my bedroom. I didn't use the rest of the house at all. I didn't use it. To me, to protect myself was to try and make myself as small as possible. You know, if you're going to like bunch yourself up in a ball in a corner of a room. It's the same kind of analogy. I thought if I just stayed in one small bit of the house, I wasn't going to aggravate it or be in its presence. I just thought if I could just make myself as small as possible by staying in one room, that it would help me in some way. But by then, to be honest, I think my brain had it got so bad. I was just doing anything to try and protect myself and my baby. I had a baby there. I came home from the hospital thinking, right, okay, I cannot leave this baby alone in a room. So if I was upstairs, Jessie would be upstairs with me. If I came downstairs, Jessie would be downstairs with me. And if I walked into the kitchen, I wouldn't leave him in the front room. I was so super hyper aware of the house was a danger. And in the end, I confined both of us just to one room because I just couldn't. I couldn't risk him being. I mean, I would never have let him sleep upstairs and I'd be downstairs pottering about. That just wasn't possible in that house. The very one time I did do it, Jessie was asleep in his cot, and I just thought, oh, I'm going to be 3 minutes. I'm literally going to iron two things. He'll be okay to leave there. So I went down. This was in the evening time. I went downstairs. I went into the cage room, which is where the iron was set up. Turned the iron on. Started ironing my shirt for work, and Jessie had these Thomas the Tank Engine toys, and they're battery operated, and you have to turn them on. And of course, they chug around making little noises and singing songs. And I was doing the ironing, and these Thomas the Tank Engines just came from the corner of the room, chug, 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 and were literally winding themselves around my feet and around the ironing board. I thought, oh God, and I just panicked, and my first thing I thought, was so angry with myself. Why did you come down? Why did you come down? You're stupid, you should have known it. That was my first thing. It wasn't fear, it was anger. I was so angry with myself that I'd left the room. I turned off the iron, and I ran through to the front room, opened the stairs door to go up the stairs, and I saw a man at the top of the stairs. Now, he was in modern day clothing. He had like brown chinos and a white shirt. And he was standing outside my bedroom door, basically. My baby was asleep in the cot there. That was one of the last things. I was gone not long after that because I realised that this is just getting ridiculous. It's in between me and my baby. I can't even go downstairs for 3 minutes and do some ironing.
Did you say in the book that you actually ran past him to get to your son, or through him to get? I know that one of your friends ran through this jailer in order to get to the bathroom, but did you have to do the same thing?
I mean, when Jackie did it, she was quite confrontational about it. I just did it out of sheer fear, and the fact that I had to get to my baby. I mean, I don't think Jackie saw the same man as I did. Who she saw was what you would describe as maybe the jailer, and he was very confrontational with her, and she was with him. Mind you, she's very, very tough. I think if it's me, I would certainly aren't going to charge through a spirit. Having said that, when your baby's in there, a mother will do anything. But it was then, within a few days, I knew I had to leave. And so I literally got an offer from my friend Kerry. She said I could go and live with her. She had a spare room the other side of Colchester. So I just literally packed some stuff in a bag. It's one thing me being an adult, but a baby, you can't ever put your children at risk like that. After I'd left there, the gentleman who killed himself, his wife, when she came to see me, she brought me all the records of previous owners of the house, which I'd never had before. The old-fashioned parchments, the old calligraphy writing. Now, my sister's a historian, so I can't make head nor tail of it. Well, we have records going actually back 200 years. We don't have the ones before that. For example, one man brought it for £150 and sold it weeks later for £100. Now, of course, £50 300 years ago. My point is, we've got factual scientific evidence that house, people just can't stay in there. It's like, well, okay, nobody might buy into me and think I'm a loon. Well, okay, that's fine. I don't really care. I don't mind what people think of me. But the scientific fact is, we have for hundreds of years, nobody's managed to stay, apart from one other person, one other lady. Nobody stays in that house longer than 3.5 years. And a lot of them were 6 months or a year.
Really interesting that it seems to be that no one can withstand any more than that, and that weird. People eventually have to leave. So a woman called, I think Sharon, rented the cage after you'd moved out, and she'd had some experiences there as well. Do you happen to know if her experiences were similar to yours?
Yeah, she had lots of activity. The end thing for her, she rang me up in a terrible state. The final thing for her was she felt like she was lying in bed and she felt like she was getting pushed down on the chest. She said it was like 2 knees were on her chest. And she felt that she was attacked in her bed. For her, that was the last. You know, it's terrifying. I stayed a lot longer than a lot of people. A lot of people, even that bought the house, only sustained that type of activity for weeks or months. But it seems that it's happened to a lot of people. And of course, since I've left the house, I mean, I didn't know any of this beforehand, but since I've left, a lot of people have come to me and said, we've heard this story, we'd heard that, we know of that person that lived there. And there's been so many owners of the house over so many years.
Richard, does that sound like any other cases that you've come across where people are repeatedly only able to stay in a location for a given set of time and then they have to leave?
It's one of the things I look for is I'll look at the property records when I am called on a private help case, because it's very suggestive if tenants that are renting are moving out on a consistently regular basis, and even more so, I think, when it requires a sale. You know, because renters kind of come and go, and looking at the village, looking at the surroundings, looking at St Osyth, it's not as though this is in the middle of a bad area. I didn't find any external factors that would explain it. And as Vanessa says, it does appear that there is something in that house, something that makes it a hostile environment, for want of a better term.
Yeah, there are countless other cases where you have that sort of continued activity. I know that, for example, in the Borley Rectory case, there was this entity that was believed to be the nun that was pleading for mass and prayers and candles, so asking for help in some way. And I think Vanessa, a lady called, I think it's Kelly Bebbington, that cleansed the property, but that didn't actually stop things from happening. So why do we think the spirits aren't leaving? And is there anything that can be done about that going forward?
I think there was something bad there. I think the bad thing that's gone there has possibly gone. There's a medium, American medium, Chris Fleming, and a lady called June Lundgren. She's also American, actually, and she's a medium, and she's absolutely amazing and skillful at what she does. And I think between the two of them, they've removed something dark. There's still ghosts there, and they had said to me that the ghosts want to stay. A lot of them want to stay, but I think the dark thing, the negative thing, I think they've managed to clear that. Having said that, the house will never be completely clear. I mean, it's still active now. I mean, but what it's done for me is it's taken the fear away from me from going in the house. But before this, I'd had it over the years after I moved out. I had it cleansed so many times by so many different people, by so many different religions and so many different ways, and nothing had ever worked. So ultimately, it still hasn't worked because it's still as active now as it ever was. There was a group in last weekend. It's always EVPs and the activity and the videos, the footage they're taking. You know, I don't think it'll ever change. I don't think it wants to change.
I know that you had somebody in the property, I think, a few years ago. I think there was a gentleman called Ron Bowers that had taken some photographs at the property. And I wondered whether or not either yourself, Vanessa, or you, Richard, whether or not you'd captured anything similar.
The people send me pictures all the time, and there are literally hundreds of light anomalies, of flashes, of faces, of figures, of shadow people, of the black mass. In my experience, what people have sent me, it's constant all the time.
Speaking personally, I've seen Ron's photographs. I didn't capture anything like that when I was in the cage at all. I've a pretty high threshold for what I'll consider to be paranormal, though. I'm a big believer that much of what some people, and I'm not speaking about Ron, this is a complete generalization, but much of what some people in the paranormal field believe is ghostly is nothing more than pareidolia, the eye's desire to see faces and shadows where they aren't there. That's not to say there aren't genuine photographs. I'm saying that you have to set a pretty high bar for what you believe is paranormal and what isn't, especially when you're looking at reflective surfaces such as windows and mirrors.
Yeah, and how that's interpreted by different people can be wildly different, can't it, depending on their experience and the equipment, even down to the equipment that they're using.
Absolutely, but I mean, there have been some impressive photographs. My friends over at East Drive Paranormal captured a shadow figure inside the cage, which is a pretty fascinating one. The trouble is that when all those photographs are taken, for the most part, I wasn't there and neither were you. So it's never going to be possible to definitively say what is paranormal and what isn't without having been there at the time and trying to recreate it.
Reading about all the things that happened to you at the cage, Vanessa, it must have left its scars physically, emotionally, and even perhaps financially. So, as I said before, you're clearly a strong person and you recognise that in yourself as well. But has the cage in some way made you stronger?
Yeah, I think it's completely changed my life. It's certainly changed the way I think and I feel about things. It's taught me that I need to, especially over the last 6 months, really, I've decided that the gift I have, or whatever you call it, being able to see ghosts from a child, I need to home in on that and learn more about that and learn not to be scared of it and learn how to communicate with them properly. It's completely changed me, to be honest. It's changed my life. I mean, the house is up for sale. It's currently up for sale. I want it gone now. I need the house gone. It's affected my life in lots of ways after. When you say financially, is that, yeah, we're paying rent and paying a mortgage still. I've done a lot of research since I've left the cage, and I don't know of any hauntings really that are quite as ferocious as this. I haven't heard of anything that's quite as bad as this. Certainly not in this country that I know of. I mean, I know what happened to myself in there, and I know it was intense and really extreme. It was extreme what happened there. So yeah, it's changed a lot of my life.
The catalogue of phenomena that you've witnessed there and that other people have witnessed there is certainly extensive when you compare it to other cases. I mean, we all know about things like Borley Rectory and the Enfield poltergeist, but nothing on the scale, certainly that I've come across, comes anywhere close to the phenomena that you describe. So you're obviously selling the property, and no one would blame you for that. But what's the interest been like? You know, do you have some serious buyers, or is it tend to be paranormal people?
No, it's been up for sale for like 10 years, and I have had like one person the entire time. I just think the house will sell when it's ready to. I've done everything I can. I think it's one of those things that the next owner is already chosen. I think it's the same as I was. I knew I had to own that house. God knows why, for whatever reason. And I think it's going to be the same again next time, that the person who owns it will need to look after it and be the next custodian of it, because they're going to buy a haunted house. It's not going to be all, love and light in there. It's not going to be. It's the nature of the house. But it's also a very special house and a unique house. I mean, I've done 17 TV programs on it so far, and a Channel 4 drama coming out about it soon. So it's a well-known house, and of course, the book with Richard. So it'll take a special person to take it on, to buy it. But I need to move on with my life. I need it gone because, of course, I want to get on with the rest of my life as well. But I think the cage will decide when that time is, rather than me.
So, in terms of what happens next, obviously we know, Vanessa, you're trying to sell the cage, but Richard, what's really next for you in terms of investigation? Is this a closed book for you for the cage, or do you think that you'll return one day soon to do future investigations?
I would be happy to go back. I think that Vanessa has more of her own story to tell, and the book that we wrote tells the investigative side of things, which is about half of the book, and Vanessa's story. And there's a lot that occurred that she wasn't able to put in the book purely for space reasons. You know, it's a balancing act. And so I think that Vanessa will probably go on and tell the unedited version of her own story. For me, I'd be happy to go back any time, but I have such a big caseload right now. I have several more book projects and investigations in the works, so wouldn't be for a good few years, if at all.
That sounds fascinating, actually. A second book about your personal experiences of the cage.
It's already pretty much written. It's called Secrets of the Cage. But it also says what happens after. I mean, we dug up the floors. We dug up the floors in trying to find. We found bones underneath there. We found artifacts underneath there. There's so really 70%, 60% of the story hasn't been told yet. I didn't leave it there when I left. It took me a few years to get the courage to go back, but you know that there's a lot more to tell, which has never been told. So it'll all be out there one day if anyone's interested in hearing it.
Oh, definitely. I'm looking forward to that book already. So as soon as that's on the shelf, I'll be snapping that one up. From the book's perspective, the one that you've just launched, how can people find that?
Yeah, Amazon, of course, have it in Britain and here in the States. You can also find it at Waterstones in the UK, bookstores, and Barnes & Noble here in the US.
That's great. Is there somewhere that people can go online? Like you say, you've got richardestep.net, I think, to review some of the evidence. Is all of the evidence there, or can people contact you online to get access to some of the other investigation material?
If people are interested, I'm always happy to share what evidence I have. I post some of it at richardestep.net in blog posts when I'm writing about certain aspects of what I do. For example, that EVP I wanted to post for people's opinions, and just to share it and let people hear it.
And also, if anyone's interested in the house or buying it, they can contact me by email on vanessa56roman@hotmail.co.uk. So if anyone wants to buy the most haunted house in the UK, please email me and I'll sell it to you. If you're the right type of person.
Absolutely. Is that the same contact email for anybody wanting to investigate the cage as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, James, as fun as it is reading the book, go in and make up your own mind. Go spend a night or so in the cage, especially if you're skeptical. I am very used to people saying that this kind of stuff can't happen. It's rubbish. I'm dealing with crazy people, blah, blah, blah. It's a lot more difficult to say that when you're inside those walls yourself, as a number of reporters have found out. It's an active location.
Thank you ever so much for your time today. I wish you both every success in the future, and I'm looking forward to reading Secrets of the Cage already, and also I'll be watching you, Richard, to see what you're up to next in terms of your paranormal investigations, either here in the UK or across the Atlantic.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to join you today.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you.
You've been listening to The Inner Sanctum with me, James Padmore. Please join me again next time.